Hello, guys. This
Mm-hmm.
is Stanley,
Otito.
and welcome to Mental Health Awareness Month, May. We
Uh-huh.
have some distinguished guests,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to let them introduce themselves because they're going to do a much better job than we both can.
Okay.
Uh, Ladies first.
Mm.
Hello, I'm Dr. Josephine Mokongho. I'm a psychiatrist. I currently work at Christiana Care Hospital in Newark, Delaware. I am board certified in general adult psychiatry and consultation liaison psychiatry, which basically means psychiatry in the medically ill. My subspecialty is reproductive psychiatry, which means that I spend the bulk of my clinical time taking care of women, health issues in women who are pregnant or in their postpartum year. I am also the director of faculty development, which means that I participate a lot in education, not just of my co-psychiatrists and co-physicians, but also teaching other people and non-psychiatrists and non-physicians about mental illness.
Mhm. Gentlemen.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and thank you so much, Stan and Utito, for shining a light on this very important topic. My name is Sunmolu Shoyinka. I'm a psychiatrist, triple boarded psychiatrist in general adult psychiatry, addiction medicine, and community and public psychiatry, and I serve as the chief medical officer for Philadelphia's public mental health system. I'm also the author of this book,
Yeah.
which is titled Understanding Mental Health, a Guide for Faith Communities. And it's a tool that is intended to demystify mental health for everybody, really. Thank you for having us.
Okay. Okay, let's get to it. This is going to touch a little bit on, everything, because I think this is a conversation we should be having. We're not yet having it, to me, at the depth at which we should be. And so people basically are kind of suffering, right? So for Dr. Shoyinka, you're a returning guest on the couch, and for very good reason, right? We just said this is the month of May, Mental Health Awareness Month, and you've written that book, which I have read, and I know it's a book for its time and its season, which is like now. So as a triple board certified psychiatrist and a loving husband, right? You're one and only, my dear friend. My question for you today is, how do we tackle the thorny issue of what to do when one partner in a marriage has mental health challenges? And it's a double-edged question because sometimes the partner doesn't even know that they're having the mental health issues. And so they will take on a defensive stance, right? Which then actually prevents them from getting the help they need, both from their spouse and other care providers. So my question then, or my questions, right, one at a time, will be, what happens when the spouse is not aware and as such is not facing the idea that they may need help and therefore refuses any bids in that direction? Also, what happens when the spouse is actually ill, acutely or chronically, and needs help, rather than abandonment, I'll come back to this, right? Or gets routed only to unilateral, culturally influenced remediation strategies. We're Christians, we're Africans, so we know all about the prayer, circles, the exorcism, the herbalist treatment. So help us speak to this, right? The two issues where the person is not aware and now they are actually ill, and people only tend to go towards one way because of culture.
Thank you. I think you're absolutely right. This is such a critical issue, and to unpack it, I think we'll need several conversations. And I'm so glad Dr. Josephine is here, because you've actually kind of lived through this multiple times and walked people through this. Let me start by saying that the woman, the man, in biblical as well as in many traditional cultures, is the head of the home.
Mm-hmm.
Woman is the neck of the home.
Mm-hmm.
She's the one that oftentimes is actually the heart of the home.
Mm-hmm.
I say that to say this: when a woman is in crisis, the mother, the wife in that family, the entire family is in crisis. So I think it's important to start with that there's more than one person that is suffering here. And we have to keep our eyes on the woman because she's, in this scenario, the one that's experiencing the greatest distress. But we have to keep in mind that there's a whole family system spouse, children who are probably impacted by this as well. And we have to come at it from that position of understanding and empathy. Let me say one other thing, and you've touched on it a couple of times in your question. When a person, mental health conditions occur on a spectrum, right? There's the mild end, which, typically people kind of recognize or they experience the stress, but there's still what's called insight. It's the ability to recognize something is wrong. When you start getting to the moderate to severe end of the spectrum of illness, then people have one of the cardinal features of almost all of these conditions is something called in doctor speak, as Joe said, anosognosia. It's a lack of insight. It's a loss of awareness that the problems that are going on emanate from within the persons themselves. It's actually a neurological issue. That is probably the single most frustrating thing for family members that are involved in that situation. The recognition, it's obvious to everybody except the person that is experiencing the symptoms that something is seriously wrong. And that can lead to, that is one of the things that oftentimes leads to spouses leaving or, and this is inexcusable abuse, domestic violence, that sort of thing. I won't excuse that, but this plays into those scenarios. Now, in terms of what can a spouse do? There are very many things a spouse can do. So let's start with the foundation of prayer and recruiting support. Because the truth is mental health is a team sport. Regardless of what degree of severity you need support, and you need, particularly for the more chronic, severe, persisting conditions, you will need that support for a long time. And a church community can be, with the right awareness, with the right understanding, can be a tremendous source of support. Or they can also be, and have been in our culture, not so much of a support when there's a single interpretation of illness. It's demonic possession, all the things you talked about. It's, spiritual attack. It's person has just been obstinate. So we have to speak to that as well. We have to be aware that those ideas persist and they are not helpful. It's also not helpful when a church community says, you should stop taking treatments. If you really have faith, you'll be fine without it. That is actually, it's more than unhelpful. That's cruel, actually, to say that. You wouldn't say that to somebody who's getting cancer treatment. All right. So I digress. Let me come back to answer your question. What's the first thing that we can do is to educate ourselves. Most mental health conditions they have behavioral manifestations. They are neurological, they're brain-based. You can actually see brain scans and so on, and you can actually see the illness in when you do functional imaging or even just structural imaging. First thing is educate yourself. Pattern recognition is key to understanding mental health conditions. So depression has a pattern. Psychotic illnesses, and there are many of them, have a pattern. Anxiety conditions have a pattern. They have a specific way that they manifest. So once you recognize what's going on, then you can intelligently assist and support. That's number one. Number two thing is, I think, to help to connect your loved one to treatment. And, some of this involves things that we struggle with as Africans in particular. We struggle to trust treatment systems. There's a reason for that. We're afraid, the word will get out, the stigma, or we are afraid that they will abuse our spouse or our loved one, or we ourselves will be punished. So we have to understand, but the best thing you can do is to get that person into care as quickly as possible and ensure that they get into care. The third piece, and I'll stop there because I'm saying a lot here. The third thing is to ensure that you yourself are getting help and support. The right response is not to flee. The right response is to get help for yourself, and so that you can hang in there for the long term. And that help can look very different. Some people get into therapy themselves some people recruit, loved ones around them. And if there are kids involved, you absolutely have to help them understand what's going on in language that they can latch onto, language that they can understand, so they don't. Because when you listen to people who have grown up in a home where there's untreated mental illness, it's actually pretty traumatizing. So I'll stop there and hand it off to Dr. Joe for your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. I feel like there are threads that we can pick on, but let's hear from Dr. Josephine. Yeah. Okay.
All right. So Dr. Joe, we double board certified in psychiatry and consultation liaison. We asked Dr. Shoyinka a general question about when one spouse develops mental health issues. But we want to delve a little deeper into an unspoken factor that predisposes women to mental health, and that's the issue of pregnancy. While we sometimes take for granted uneventful pregnancies and healthy babies, for a certain segment of women, pregnancy is a trigger for their mental health diagnosis, be it depression or the big one, pregnancy-induced psychosis. Please tell us about this condition and its hidden nature, and how we husbands, can be on the lookout for signs of this condition.
Okay, thank you so much for including me in this. So yes, the state of being pregnant and having birth and being postpartum period are all risk factors for many women, for this spectrum, to use those words, of mental illness. It could range from a woman who has never had any issues in the past, now all of a sudden developing issues in the perinatal period. It could also be someone who has had some stuff going on in the past, and this is like an extra trigger for them, and another episode. We tend to treat them under the same umbrella.
Okay.
And when you think about, well, what could happen to a woman? It could be the entire range from baby to depression, or, as you said, the big bad postpartum psychosis, which is the kind of stuff that gets people on the news. So when we think about baby blues, I think it's very common, and it's short. It doesn't last long. You find mothers often are not extremely, but quite emotional, easily overwhelmed, easily tearful, could be a little bit irritable. That goes away within a few days. Baby blues goes away in a few days, and it doesn't require any clinical treatment or intervention. Postpartum depression is different. Women who struggle with this have low mood, excessive tearfulness. They have difficulty bonding with the baby, regardless of whether or not they wanted to be pregnant. But now the baby is here, and they find it hard to feel connected to their baby. They find it hard to sometimes even go through the daily motions. And for some of them, that's all they can do. They concentrate on doing everything for the baby, but they can't really cope with any other aspect of life. There are feelings of difficulty concentration, feelings of guilt, feelings that they are a bad mother. And it sometimes can progress to the point that they feel that they're such a bad mother that maybe if they took themselves out of the equation, their families and their babies would be better off. I've had so many people say, well, if I weren't here, my husband could find a better wife and a better mother for my child. And then they try very hard. They try so hard to be better mothers, try so hard to work hard, they try so hard to feel better. And often without any intervention, it doesn't happen because it doesn't work that way. You can't will yourself out of a postpartum depression episode. So that's the difference between baby blues and postpartum depression. Postpartum depression does require treatment. Very often women do not have access to treatment or do not believe they should get treatment. And then they worry because quite often mothers are trained to sacrifice. And they worry, okay, if I were to get treatment or to get medications, I'm trying to breastfeed, how would that affect the health of my baby? And they decide, you know what, maybe I should just tough it out. As long as my baby is okay, it doesn't really matter what happens to me. But the evidence shows that if the mother is depressed in pregnancy or postpartum, even in the absence of medications, the fact that the mother is in a stressful state causes some hormonal reactions, and that affects the health of the baby.
Yeah.
A pregnant woman who is depressed, even in the absence of medications, her baby is at risk for low birth weight, for being small for gestational age. The baby is at risk for behavioral problems when they're older. So when you want to think about, well, I'm a mom and I should sacrifice for the sake of my baby, what are you really sacrificing? And what risk are you protecting the baby from? Okay. Now, going forward to postpartum psychosis, that is, again, it's the scary one.
Yeah.
And that's the one that people worry about because it can lead to bad things. In extreme cases, it can lead to not only suicide, but infanticide as well. There are some risk factors, but it can arise out of the blue. For patients with bipolar disorder, there is a risk. And as I tell patients, it is not common. However, when it happens, it can be serious. So it is important enough to talk to everyone about it. Not that everyone with bipolar disorder will develop this. Probably most people will not. It's a very small percentage, less than 5%, who would. However, it can happen very quickly. And when a woman is suffering from postpartum depression, what could happen is they start to have odd beliefs about themselves or about the baby. They start to believe that they are evil or the baby is evil. They start to be very paranoid. They may not eat. They may believe that the baby has specific gifts and the baby can fly, and I mean literally fly. We all believe our babies are special, and all babies are special, but babies can talk to you at 2 months, not with words. And sometimes they start to believe that, okay, it's time for the baby and I to literally go to heaven and do something seriously to harm themselves or harm their babies or harm their other children.
Can I ask a quick question here? What is the time duration, right? Because I've read that this can occur even many years after the person has had the baby. What would you say about that in terms of the timing? Is it like soon after pregnancy, or is it something that, could occur a few years after the person has had the baby? Let me hear from you as an expert.
So technically, postpartum psychosis can happen up to 1 year after someone has had a baby. If it's after 1 year, it is psychosis, but it's not necessarily what we traditionally think of as postpartum psychosis.
Okay.
And other behaviors that you would find, that the mom is not sleeping, the mom might be pacing or chanting or having odd behavior. She may not be able to eat. She may start accusing people around her of trying to harm her or harm the baby. The mom may think that there's something trying to harm her baby, and the only way to protect the baby is by smothering them or
drowning
them, which is another common thing. So, and there's a lot of stigma to this. And most of the mothers think, how can I be having these thoughts about my baby? If anybody hears, they're going to take my baby away from me. And it doesn't help because our society tends to call these women selfish, bad moms. And in their mind, especially someone that is trying to end her life, a lot of times they are doing it because they feel that they are burdens. And it is not normal for a mother to feel that she is a burden to her 2-month or 3-month-old child. But that is actually what they feel. And in their mind, they're trying to make lives better for their children by taking themselves out of the equation, or make life better for their child by doing this. So what does this mean? It means that they need help. Postpartum psychosis is a psychiatric emergency. And I often tell patients that, this is a situation that I would much rather have you worry if you are overreacting than run the risk of you underreacting. So for the spouses, because this is a situation that the mother may not be able to realize what is going on. For the spouses or the support system, if you notice that she's not sleeping, even when the baby is sleeping, she's up, she's pacing, she's starting to show signs of paranoia. And all moms are protective. Moms, I want to be careful. I want to be sure that you've washed your hands before you touched my child and things like that. That's not what I'm talking about. If she starts to accuse people of hurting her child, or she gives someone her child to hold and she says, "Oh, what were you doing? Were you whispering some things, or you were chanting?" Or she starts to pace at night, starts to express odd beliefs that are out of norm for her culture, her economic group. That is a, act now.
Okay.
And what it is, it doesn't mean that she's a bad mother. It just means that she needs help and she's suffering from one of the more common postpartum disorders.
Okay.
Talking about postpartum depression, we've talked about the big bad postpartum psychosis, and I wanted to emphasize that it is rare.
Yeah.
It's uncommon. The reason we talk about it is because it happens so quickly and can end badly.
Yeah.
A lot of moms suffer from postpartum depression. And the symptoms that we talked about, the poor sleep, poor appetite, the loss of meaning, the feelings of guilt. And it doesn't mean that you progress to postpartum psychosis. That is very rare.
Okay.
But it is a very distressing state and it is amenable to treatment.
Okay.
There are resources available and treatment can be either therapy or counseling or medications if needed.
Okay.
There are many options for medications that a pregnant or breastfeeding woman can take that would not impact the safety of her baby, whether she's pregnant or breastfeeding. Okay. There are lots of options, so talk with your doctor. Regarding, well, how do I get help? The first step could be your obstetrician. Obstetricians these days are increasingly resourced. In my hospital, we work very closely with our obstetricians. So that's a first step. Your primary care practitioner also could help you start medications or refer you to a therapist. And talking with the therapist to determine whether or not you need therapy or medications. A lot of women do well with therapy alone, along with the mindfulness and spiritual practices that Dr. Shoyinka discussed and has in his book. There are some people who also need medication. The same way hypertension or diabetes can be managed with dietary changes and exercise for some people, and some other people need medication, and yet others need insulin. The brain is part of the body, and emotions and depression and all those things, they are all up here. We think about emotions as being located here, but this is just a pump. It is the center of the body, and I think that that's how we got that idea of, I feel it in my heart, or however people say it. That's the center, that's the pump. But the brain is part of the body, and like other parts of the body, the brain gets sick too.
Fault.
It's not her fault.
And it's not her fault. She's not doing it on purpose.
Stan is like, what?
I'm like, whoa. What does act now look like? I mean, wouldn't she be resistant or defensive if you calling a doctor? I mean, for the spouse here, and I'm speaking for the lay people in the room and my viewers, what does act now look like from the spouse's perspective?
So in the US, when I say act now, I mean call 911 or go to the nearest emergency room. If a new mother is acting out of touch with reality, is acting paranoid, is seeing things or hearing things that other people typically do not see or hear. If a new mother is talking about hurting herself or hurting her baby, or has made attempts to hurt herself or hurt her baby, that is, call the emergency services or get yourself to the nearest emergency room.
So what if
let me add if I can add a couple of things real quick. So since July of 2022, in addition to calling 911, people can now call 988 in the US. 988 is a dedicated behavioral health crisis number that connects people to a trained counselor, and this is available around the country. You can do this from any phone. And in some jurisdictions, they can actually send a mobile crisis team that is trained behavioral health clinicians, and sometimes people with lived experience to that location, which sometimes is experienced as less intrusive. But I absolutely agree with Dr. Joe. If there's a question of safety or risk, if there's a question of potential harm, sometimes it's more appropriate to reach out to 911. And I'll just add one last thing. In many counties now, some counties, big cities like Philadelphia, when you call 911, what you really want is a behavioral health response to a behavioral health emergency. Because police, as highly trained as they are, their primary charge is public safety. And sometimes bad things do happen when you call police. There's a quarter of people who die in police-involved shootings are people in a mental health crisis. So the systemic response to that, and this is important to keep in mind as we talk about responses, in many cities, including Philadelphia, has been to create co-responder teams.
Okay.
So you have police officers and behavioral health personnel who can respond to that situation. They can make sure everything is safe, but then they can also bring forward the behavioral health response. So that's certainly available in Philadelphia and Houston and some other jurisdictions.
Okay.
So it's important to know that all these resources exist.
Okay, because that was going to be my question. Like, what if the person doesn't want to go, right? The person is already thinking that they're not safe. Maybe they're having this, that people are out to get them. And then now you bring in people who look threatening in that sense to them in that state. So just wondering what then happens there. But I feel like if a behavioral crisis response team responds, then they'll probably know how to de-escalate the situation. Dr. Joe, let me come back to something you had said about the postpartum depression, which I think is really important to tap upon, right? Because I'm thinking about when I had, my own babies, and thinking about this situation where you said that the mother is still taking care of the baby. So on the front, on the,
Surface level.
on the surface level, she seems okay because it's almost like single-minded, right? In terms of, I'm going to take care of this baby, and then every other thing is secondary. How do you distinguish that from, how people will say, well, they just had a baby, so now every other thing is, secondary. There's that, generally that may occur, but how do you distinguish where the person is almost like, they lack, what's the word I'm looking for? Like zest, right? For other things outside of just, let me take care of this baby because at least this is meaningful, to me in this state. How do you differentiate that? Because I feel like for the spouses, just seeing them taking care of the baby to them is like, oh, that's normal, right? So how do you help people look for signs of this?
So you're right. It's sometimes hard, especially if the woman finds it hard to express. But again, there are symptoms of depression. As much as she's taking care of the baby, when they say sleep when the baby sleeps, and I realize that is not entirely realistic.
Yes.
Especially, because you can't wash dishes when the baby is washing dishes and pump when the baby is pumping. So there are a lot of things that the mother has to do when the baby is sleeping. But number one, I would say, what they express. If they express it, do they feel, are they going through the motions? Do they actually feel joy and meaning? They feel connected to the baby? How are they relating with you, the spouse? How are they relating with the other children? When you offer them a break, which is what should be happening, do they take it? How do they respond? How do they interact with people, their loved ones outside that circle? Because yes, they are taking care of the baby and that is normal and they'll be focused on the baby. But most people would still want to interact with their friends. They would still find pleasure and meaning. So when they start to lose pleasure and meaning in activities that they otherwise found meaningful, and it's different from, my baby is not feeling well, or I have to take the baby to this appointment now, but other things, feel motivated to do other things to seek care of themselves? Do they feel motivated? Are they able to take showers? Are they able to take care of themselves? Are they eating properly when they have the time? Are they able to sleep? And then also talking to them.
Okay.
What kind of things do they express? Do they constantly express, I'm a bad mother? Do they constantly feel, and guilt is an unfortunate part of motherhood, but often it takes it to the extreme. You would be better off without me. I wish my child could get a better mother. And statements like that, those are things that signify that something different is going on.
Okay.
All right, we're running low on time, and you guys have to come back. But in the few minutes that we have left, I'm going to throw this question out. I'm turning it in your direction, Dr. Sho. As Christians and psychiatrists, can the two ways or paths of healing ever converge? You know, what are things you want Christians who are praying and also seeking psychiatric help to know about the journey to wellness?
It's an amazing question. And let me put it this way. So one framework that may help. Historically, you're right, the two have often butted heads, right? Freud said revert to religion as a illusion or a neurosis. And historically, psychiatry, the faith community has mistrusted psychiatry, right? Because we have different interpretations of how these conditions come about.
Yeah.
I'm glad to say, first of all, that there's more of a convergence now.
Yeah.
So certainly in psychiatry, I know that there's a recognition that faith traditions are an important part of a person's life, can give, as Josephine said, meaning, structure, and in fact are associated with better outcomes in many instances. Yeah, there's actual scientific evidence that persons who practice and adhere to a faith tradition do better in life overall and in terms of their mental health. That's not an absolute. There are problems that some of the things we talked about, but there are associations there. Now, one of the ways to get around that conflict that people still have is to think of it this way. So faith deals with oftentimes the spiritual, particularly when you think about expressions of the Christian faith, like Pentecostal or charismatic, expressions, deals with the spiritual. But there's a whole aspect of faith that involves corresponding action, things that we have to do in the natural to get the things that are promised to us, right? Now, science is the accumulation of knowledge, basic principles that work, that are proven to work. They are tested and they're proven to work. So science gives us, medical science in this case, gives us a body of knowledge that we can apply to replicably and consistently get results. So let's take an analogy. Let's step out of healing and mental health for a moment. I can pray for God to give me strength to travel the journey, right? Like if you look at the example of Elijah, he ran 20 miles, outran a chariot, right, in the rain. But we can do that, or we can get on a bicycle and harness the laws of physics, get on a bike, travel the same journey, get in a car, travel the same journey, get in a plane and travel the same journey. We use those resources because they are evidence-based. It's basically the same idea with medical science. This gives us tools and resources that we can intelligently harness to get the results that we want. So we have a body of knowledge now that we can intelligently use. And that's one of the reasons why this book was written. This book is written to provide a lot of that information. It talks about, it's called Understanding Mental Health. It's available on Amazon and BookBaby, and you can get a copy. But it talks about the origins of mental illness. It talks about the way they are treated. Talks about what to expect when you go to get treatment. It talks about basic principles of wellness, which include things like getting enough sleep, exercising, which I know Kay is phenomenal at, diet, maintaining good relationships, and certain wellness practices like reframing and deep breathing and getting out into nature. These are basic things that anybody can use that promote wellness, regardless of where you are in your life. And I'll just end by saying it is very, very true. Knowledge and understanding do make a world of difference. It does matter what we know and what we're aware of. So I'll encourage people to educate themselves, learn as much as you can about mental health. None of us can get away from it with that. There's no health without mental health. I just want to thank you guys again for shining a light on this, making space for this, talking about this. I don't think we can talk enough about mental health. It's not because I'm a psychiatrist. It's because of what I've seen in terms of overall population health. It really is true. Mental health is such a determinant of outcomes. Children, adults, elderly folks, at the societal level is so important. So
And
Yeah.
then
I was saying, what are, like, wrapping it up in terms of values, what are the practical sides, right, of making sure that the family is successful? Like, what will success be in this state, right? Since we're not talking normalcy in that sense, what would success be for a family that is going through this, especially when the mother, as Dr. Shoyinka has said, is the neck of the home and is going through these challenges? What are some things that you want to advise, like, us as Christians, as people living out in the world, in terms of managing this from a familial perspective?
Well, as I agree that, when the mother is not stable, the family is not stable. So whatever we can do to help ensure that stability is what we need to do. The mom, we tell mothers, make sure you take care of your nutrition, your sleep, use any support that's available. Because if you can't take care of yourself, if you can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah.
And helping to provide those supports whenever possible, helping to make sure that the mother gets a good night's sleep. Regardless of what medications you're taking, if she's not able to sleep at least a 4-5 hour stretch, I mean, that's the minimum, at least a 4-5 hour stretch. So taking a night feeding, making sure that the kids are taken care of so that at least she can sleep that amount, especially if she's the one taking care of the baby during the day as well. That has a huge impact on improvement of mental health, helping to provide resources, helping with food, helping with anything that you can really, and also being open and supportive.
Yeah.
A big barrier to getting help from mothers is stigma.
Yeah.
And once we recognize that, you can't will yourself out of this. You can't determine yourself out of a depressive episode, no matter how hard you try. So being understanding of that and available so that they can actually get the help that they need. Help them, because again, how are they going to get to appointments if they are not allowed to take their babies to the hospital and there's remote visits? What do they do then? So these real life supports, not everyone is qualified to be a counselor or a therapist, and not everyone understands that. But most people can help with rides and babysitting and cooking, and most people don't have to be judgmental.
It really does take a village. I think this is something that we keep saying, but sometimes people don't even know what does this village entail in the US, but you're explaining it, right? Like rides, food, all of these little things, right? Which is kind of
caring for the other kids.
Yeah, which is that what you were saying, Dr. Shoyinka, about the church, right? Rallying together to be this source of support for many people, especially those of us of African heritage. But I mean, like you all said, this is not a conversation we can end in one episode, but I'm glad we had it, right? I'm glad we had it. I'm glad we're shining a light on this, and hopefully we'll convene another panel, later in the future, or maybe next year, this month as well, because I want to believe all of us here have been touched by couples, right? Families who have gone through this challenge. And that's why we're sitting here. We're not just sitting here because we want to talk. Like, we've gone through, walk through this journey with some couples, and we know how devastating it can be, right? So the question is, if we had known all of this earlier, perhaps we will not be here. But yeah.
So I want to thank the doctors again. I'm going to have a link to Dr. Shoyinka's book in the info fill, and some of their social links if you wanted to reach out to them and ask them some questions. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and from our couch to yours, thanks for joining.
Yeah, bye.